Okay, good evening, everybody. Before we get started, I just want to do a couple things. For those that are new, the reason why we're taping this is because we're doing this for YouTube. Be able to put it on YouTube when we get them all fixed and set up, okay? Just to let you know what's going on, because you see this. But I'm the only one that's being taped. Nobody else is. Don't get nervous. Okay. I do want to mention a couple of announcements before we get started tonight. I do want to mention that if you need copies of the lecture series, tonight and the next 2 weeks, I'll be doing the 3-week series on grief and loss. Okay, and then after that, we'll do the series on codependency. Okay, so the schedules are out there. Also, we have some programs coming up we want to tell you about real quick. One of our therapists, one of our grief counselors, is doing a workshop on Friday, March 15th from 12 noon, a daytime workshop, on his Guilt Keeping You Up at Night workshop. So if you're interested in that, there are flyers up here. Please help yourself to it. That'll be on Friday, March 15th. Also, we have a psychoeducational therapy group for youth at ages 6 to 11. And that takes place every Thursday night at 7:15, and it starts on March 21st, which meant pretty soon. Okay. And then we have a program starting on March 30th by one of our eating disorder counselors called the Sandwich Generation. Sounds interesting. I like it. It's your generation, right? It's a Saturday workshop at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and 40% of middle-aged adults are caring for an aging parent and young adult children. So she does an excellent job of trying to help people to understand how to deal with situations like that. So that workshop all these flyers are out there at the front desk on your way out. So you can pick them up if you want to, okay? And then we have a women's addiction recovery group, okay, which will be taking place also starting April 1st. And that information is out there also, okay? So got a lot of stuff coming up here. You can come and take part and see what happens with it, okay? All right. Everything else is in the website. It's connected. After the meeting tonight at 8 o'clock, we have a Naranon meeting, if anyone's interested in attending at 8 o'clock. And then also we have meditation class at 8 o'clock tonight too, which you're welcome to attend also. Okay? But everything else is, oh, I forgot to mention, tomorrow night we have a new group starting. Okay, we have a recovery group starting tomorrow night, doing the 12 steps based on the Recovery Bible. It's the Christian concept of the 12 steps. So if anyone's interested, that group also will meet tomorrow night starting at 7 o'clock. Okay, and that'll be every Thursday night at 7. And it's a journey through the 12 steps based on scriptures and based on the Christian concept of recovery. Okay, all right, good. Anything else? Anybody selling something? We'll see what happens from there. We'll go. All right. We'll take care of that, Guma. Okay, okay, Mommy. I'm going to begin by doing a reading tonight from the Language of Letting Go, the Daily Meditation book for codependency. And I picked a reading from November 2nd. It's based on the grief process. To let ourselves wholly grieve our losses is how we surrender to the process of life and recovery. Some experts, like Patrick Carnes, call the 12 steps a program for dealing with our losses, a program for dealing with our grief. How do we grieve? Awkwardly, imperfectly, usually with a great deal of resistance, often with anger and attempts to negotiate, ultimately by surrendering to the pain. The grief process, says Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, is a 5-stage process: denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and finally acceptance. That's how we grieve. That's how we accept. That's how we forgive. That's how we respond to the many changes life throws our way. Although this 5-step process looks tidy on paper, it is not tidy in life. We do not move through it in a centralized manner. We usually flounder through it, kicking and screaming, with as much back and forth movement to reach that peaceful state called acceptance. We can learn to understand the grief process and how it applies to recovery. Even good changes in recovery can bring loss and consequently grief. We can learn to help ourselves and others by understanding and becoming familiar with this process. We can learn to fully grieve our losses, feel our pain, accept and forgive, so we can feel joy and love. Today, God, help me open myself to the process of grieving my losses. Help me allow myself to flow through the grief process, accepting all the stages so I might achieve peace and acceptance in my life. Let me learn to be gentle with myself and others while we go through this very human process of healing. I wanted to read that tonight because I want to kind of share for the next 3 weeks on the whole concept of grieving. To me, grieving is the ultimate process of life. And whether you realize it or not, we participate in the grieving process every day. Grieving process simply means that it's a process by which we're able to go through change, go through new directions in our life, and be able to say goodbye. A powerful process of grieving takes us in different dimensions in different areas of our life. When we talk about grieving, though, we talk about a process. You know, nobody just grieves. Whenever we lose something, someone dies, something close to us comes to an end. Even when it comes to an addict, letting go of addiction and developing a new lifestyle in their life. There's always a process of grieving the old so something new can be born. And grieving is not a very simple process. I refer to it as the process of life. I'm using an analogy to kind of bring this out. I take the analogy from Scripture. It's the parable of the sower. And it goes like this. A man went out to sow some seed. Some of the seed fell amongst sand and soil. Some of the seed fell amongst weeds and thorns. Some of the seed fell on good ground. The seed that fell on the sandy soil couldn't grow. Kind of laid there until either the wind blew it away or something happened to it. The seed that fell among the weeds and thorns started to grow, but the weeds and thorns grew so strong that it choked it out. The seed that fell on the good ground began to grow, developing deep and solid roots and foundations. And from the roots and foundations, everything else was able to come forward. I use that as an analogy to explain the grief process because it's a process we go through in life. Because one of the things you have to try to understand is that nobody does anything easily. See, I think unfortunately what happens a lot of times, and especially those of us who have addictive personalities, we have a tendency to want things quickly. We have a tendency to want things to happen when we want them to happen. But the hardest part in life is letting go and allowing things to happen, I always say, in God's time, not in our time, when they are supposed to happen. And it's hard because so many of us see things the way we think we see them. But we have to be able to open to the process. And I'll kind of show this to you and give you some examples of what I'm talking about and begin with the process of the most powerful part of grieving, and that is the death of someone. You notice when somebody dies, no matter how they die, we go through a process. Part of the process is denial, the 5 stages of grieving. Denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and acceptance. Denial is a natural process, by the way, and don't get me wrong, because I think denial is a good thing. Sounds strange. But denial is simply a protection that we do until we're ready to deal with something. So very many times, so many of us protect ourselves by putting ourselves into denial until we're ready to look at things we have to look at. Even when someone close to us dies, no matter which way they die, we have a tendency very many times, because of fear and anxiety, to kind of go to a stage where we either can accept it or not accept it, but we actually look at it differently. For example, you notice in hospitals, if someone dies, they usually keep the body there and they ask you to come up and look at the body. Why do they do that? They're actually starting the grieving process for you. If someone is lost in an airplane crash or lost at sea, and you never actually witnessed the individual themselves, you will still have that wonderment inside of you. Did they really die? Are they out there somewhere? what's going on. And so it's very difficult to start the grieving process that way. And that's why sometimes we need to be able to experience some things concrete to allow the process to begin. And even when we experience that, families come together. Did you ever notice? They gather together and they tell stories about the individuals, tell stories about the person. And all the stories are positive. And basically, it's almost like the person is still alive. And as a result, then, they basically stay in that process of denial for a period of time because I'm not ready. I use the example. My aunt lives over in Pennsauken, New Jersey. And basically, it was her. She lived by herself, and she's in a wheelchair, and her brother lived with her. Both of them were never married. Her brother was a lot younger than her, and one day he came home from work and actually had a massive heart attack, and he died. And so basically, instead of her calling 911 as most people would do, we heard nothing until about hours later. She called up and said, "Can somebody come over and help me?" So I went over, I walked into her house. When I walked in, she was actually forced herself out of the wheelchair, was on the floor next to him, was putting cold compresses on his head. And she kept saying to me, he fainted. Well, he had been dead for maybe, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 hours. And so literally I had to help her off the floor, and I had to basically call for help and get things started and work with her. And she sat in the wheelchair and just said to me, "Is he going to be okay?" And I tried to explain things to her. It didn't make any difference. Because in her eyes, her brother did not die. In her eyes, she had to keep him alive. Why? Because she couldn't deal with the feelings that were going on inside of her. And so many times in the course of our journey in life, we have to do these things. It's a protection. What am I protecting? I'm protecting myself and my feelings and the stuff going on inside of me. And so as a result then, the grieving process can take anywhere from 18 months up to 3 years, and sometimes longer. For some people, they may stay in this for a long period of time. We're only going to grieve when you're ready to grieve. You're going to deal with something when you're ready to deal with it. And I find this really interesting because so many times in the course of our journey, we go through this. I'll give you an example in my own life. My father died when I was 26 years old. And basically, I had been ordained for 3 months. And what I did basically was in my codependency, and because I know at that stage in my life I was pretty frozen, I helped the undertaker dress him. I literally said the mass, did the eulogy, did the whole entire funeral, organized the luncheon, organized everything, and everybody said to me, "How can you do this? You just lost your dad." And I said, "Not a problem. I do it for everybody else. Why can't I do it for him?" But really, in reality, I was frozen solid. I didn't deal with my father's death until 16 years later. I never grieved his death until 16 years later, until I finally got into recovery, and I began to get in touch with my feelings. And many of us go through losses in the course of our journey, and those losses are painful. We go through them because basically we're not ready to say goodbye. And many of us never get the chance to say goodbye. And so the concept is, so many times in the course of our journey, we have to be able to get in touch with what I call the spirit and not the external. I'll explain that in a minute. My mother died in 1982. And guess what I did? The exact same thing I did with my father. I literally did the whole shooting match. And it's amazing how I finally had to break down and deal with those feelings. But it comes when you're ready, not only when you're ready. And that's why so many of us protect ourselves and put a wall around ourselves, because we're not ready to feel the feelings and go through the feelings of the process of change. Now take that in other directions. Take that into the whole area of relationships. When you're ending a relationship, something comes to an end. It's hard to say goodbye, even though intellectually I know it's the right thing that I'm doing. But deep down inside, I don't want to do it. because deep down inside, I'm fighting and battling something that's obvious right in front of me. And I find that interesting in the grieving process because it takes a long time to break the process of denial. And what we're really scared of is once you break that process, you're going to experience something called anger. Now, here's an emotion that gets a bad name. To me, anger is the healthiest, most beautiful emotion on the face of the earth, if it's processed properly. But anger can also be very destructive. That's why many of us are scared of anger. And many of us actually, in growing up, were trained not to be angry. I know growing up in my family and growing up in my environment as a child, I was always told that I was kind of bad if I got angry. You're not supposed to get angry. And as a result then, very many times, every time that feeling came up, what did I do? Stuffed it right back down again, didn't deal with it. And later on, it led me to 2 addictions, led me to a major eating disorder. All those things basically are interconnected. They're all part of it. Now, I didn't realize this until actually around 86, 87, 88, when I got into my eating disorder recovery program. I didn't realize how much stuff I was carrying inside of me. We're scared. See, many of us are afraid of change. We're afraid of new things. We're afraid of new directions. Take the addict. An addict is very much used to being into addiction. That is normal to an addict. When you bring an addict into recovery, it's scary. They're watching a part of their life come to an end and die. And literally, a whole new concept is being born. But believe me when I tell you this, it's much easier to go back to the old than it is to go into the new. Because the old is something I'm used to, something I'm comfortable with. And that's what happens to a lot of people who stay in situations for long periods of time because they're scared and they're afraid to move forward. Mothers, family members, we're afraid to let go of our children. We're afraid to cut the umbilical cord. Why? Because so many of us want them to go a certain way. They never listen, by the way, even though we have it all mapped out for them. We have it all figured out, exactly what they're supposed to do. But they usually do what they want to do. And as a result, then, we have a hard time with that, and many times even disagree with them and even get angry at them. But at the same time, what are we doing? We have to realize the fact that they're only going to go through a change process when they're ready. And it only comes with experience, it comes with time, and I hate to say this, it comes with pain. It comes with struggle. Everything in life that's worthwhile, you have to struggle for. And it's not easy. You know, I've said this so many times, 2 of the scariest words in the English language are reality and responsibility. Having to have to face things that are going on inside of us. We experience the exact same thing in our life when it comes to sickness, mental illness, any different types of things that we experience. Instead of coming to an acceptance of them, and I can accept them intellectually very easily, I have to realize the fact that I have to go through this process of grieving. The ultimate of all grieving processes is the fact that we're all going to get old. Isn't it wonderful? Believe it or not, you want to experience the grieving process, just keep looking in the mirror. You'll see the grieving process take place. It takes place every day. I mean, you can't go back as much as you would like to. You got to stay where you are. We saw this happen a lot recently with technology. So many people are scared to death of technology because literally we did it a certain way at one time. I'm used to that way. Now you start bringing all this new stuff into play. People get scared. They get afraid. It's called change. The change process is scary. You know, I realized this in the course of my own life. You know, I was never going to give up my flip phone. Never, ever, 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 ever. My denial was very high until my granddaughter got a hold of me, worked with me, my wife worked with me, and finally now, it's amazing. Now I do things like YouTube. I got my books on audio book. I got them on Kindle. I got everything on Amazon today. It's weird. I even text. I connect with people today. It's totally amazing. In fact, I do more texting than I do talking. But I realize more and more, you either got to go with the flow of where life is and work with it, or you can basically deny it and fight it and battle it. But change is part of life. Change is a process we have to go through. In the course of life, too, we also can become very dependent on individuals and people. And then they change. And we get upset. Because they always were there for us. They always came through for us. They're always present for us. Then all of a sudden, either they die or they go through a change process themselves and they move on. And that's difficult. Even geographical changes, all kinds of changes. Change is the concept that many of us fear because the fear of change, the fear of moving forward is a big part of it. And the bottom line is this. Anger is extremely healthy in the grieving process because you have to be angry. Go back to my aunt and her brother. After 18 months, now you went into her house and literally, he was dead 18 months. You went to her house, his room was like a museum. It was set up like he was going to work the next day. Even his lunch pail was there. It's totally amazing. As far as she was concerned, she stayed in that level of denial of what happened for a long period of time. In about the 19th month or somewhere around there, I don't know when, she called me up one day screaming on the phone and told me to get over to the house. I thought something crazy happened. When I got there, I noticed that she was tearing his room apart in a wheelchair, tearing his room apart, throwing things all around, telling me to get all this garbage and this crap out of here, and screaming at him, yelling at him. He left me, everything, all this whole process in life. She finally broke her denial pattern and went into anger. And many of us don't realize it's okay to be angry at someone that we love. It's okay to be angry at someone who leaves us because we don't want them to leave. And yet we have to realize the fact that it's part of the journey of life. You have to face that. You know, one of my favorite funerals, if you have a favorite funeral, took place back when I was still a priest. When I started Starting Point back in 1977, Starting Point was a halfway house for street people in South Philadelphia. We had a house manager named Art. And Art was 43 years old. And Art died suddenly of a heart attack. He belonged to the Baptist church. And so for his funeral, they had it at a funeral parlor on Christian Street. And basically, it's a funeral I'll never forget as long as I live. You got to visualize this. We have the casket with Art's body in it. And the Baptist minister comes out and he says, have all of you come up here and looked at it? He called Art it. Have you come up here and looked at it? Are you done? If not, get up here, hurry up. And we all stood there like, you know, our mouth open and well, what's going on? And they said, you all done now? He said, good. He turned around, slammed the casket shut and said, get that thing out of here. And I'm like, this is not the typical funeral. And we're all standing there dumbfounded. And then he did something I will never forget as long as I live. He knew Art. He was a personal friend of his. And he gave a 45-minute talk about Art's spirit. And he said to us, see that body that was inside that casket? That's not Art. That's his leaky old house. Too many leaks, you had to leave. And then he went on to talk such a most beautiful thing I ever heard in my life. He was in touch with Art's spirit. And I really believe this in the course of our journey in life, that whoever has come into our life at any point of time, they came into our life to be our teacher, and basically they're still part of our life because our spirit never dies. Our spirit just moves on. I can look around this room at all these plaques and things that are here and the people that have been through these doors and things that have happened over the years. And I realize the tremendous spirit that's in this room, the energy of all the people that are part of our journey. And yes, we have to say goodbye. We say goodbye to the physical self, but never say goodbye to the spiritual self. For the spiritual self has been passed on to us. It's connected inside of us. no matter what happens. They're taken by disease, they're taken by addiction, they're taken in different areas of life. We have to realize the fact that inside of us, they're still connected. They're still part of our journey. And that's why we get stuck very many times in the denial process, the bargaining process. And many of us try, why did this happen? We try to ask all the questions. We go back and forth about things in life. Why am I getting older? I mean, many of us, use about 45 different anti-aging projects. And it's crazy. You still get old. It's amazing, isn't it? No matter what you do. And so the process is, life is a process of going on. The secret is to be able to live life, celebrate life, be part of life, and realize the fact that everything in life has a beginning and everything has an ending. Last time I checked, I think we all have a round-trip ticket. And one day, the second part of it will be punched. And it's not up to us how it gets punched. But the bottom line is, there's a beginning and there's an ending. We have to think about the Phoenix principle. For everything that comes to an end, something new is born. But the scariest part is allowing things to come to an end so something new can be born. Even in AA, we have a saying, in Naranon too, and all the 12-step programs. Sometimes somebody dies so somebody else can live. And maybe through the example of someone else that's lost, we find ourselves, someone else gets a gain. And I see this so many times in the course of our journey in life, that sometimes someone teaches by their life, and they actually give us the gift to someone else. And that's why the grieving process is such a beautiful process. It takes us through life in so many different ways. And again, I want to share just something on a personal level, because I really believe this process was so important in my own journey and in my own life. Now, I've shared this with many of you before in my own story. I knew intellectually. That's why I love this concept of the intellectual versus the spirit and versus the heart. I knew intellectually I wanted to leave the priesthood 10 years before I left. I don't know how to leave, because I was afraid of my family. I was afraid of my mom. I mean, my mom planned my priesthood. She put me in when I was 14 years old. And so I spent like 32 years between the seminary and the priesthood. It was my normal. It's all I knew. And as a result then, to actually have to make that decision to change and move forward into a new direction, to go through a change process, was scary. I'm going to tell you this right now. No one on the face of this earth goes through the grieving process alone and by themselves. We need support. We need people around us. We need to be able to share and process our feelings and be able to interact with other human beings who have gone through the same thing we've gone through. We can't do it alone. Thomas Merton said it beautifully when he said, no one is an island. None of us can do things by ourselves. We have an interconnection with one another. And that's why the grieving process takes part in conjunction with others. It takes part in family. It takes part in different areas in which we connect with one another. And so we're constantly going through change. We're going through loss. We're going through different types of things in the course of our life. But the hardest part is to say goodbye. Why? Fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of change, fear of new things, fear of new directions. And I really believe very deeply, deep down inside, that that fear can keep us stymied for a long period of time. Because intellectually, we can see what we have to do. But then to do it is another whole ball game. It takes time to do that. Why? Because the thing we don't want to feel is sadness. It's painful to feel sadness, to come to a point where I'm watching a part of my life come to an end so a new part can be born. The principle of the phoenix again, from the ashes, something new is born. And in my own life, I realize this because I thank God, and I'll get on my knees and say it. I thank God for recovery, for support groups, for people who were there for me, who took me through the process of change. I never could have done it by myself. Why? Because I was in a very comfortable situation, physically. Not emotionally, not spiritually, but physically. And by the way, it was a good life. But in reality, I was looking for something else. And what the fear is, deep down inside, in my case, how would I function? How would I earn a living? What would my family think? And so many times pressures from the outside keep us from making decisions, keep us from moving on. And literally in that whole concept, very many times, it's scary. And I know to this day, when I finally did make that decision, I thank God, and I say I'll do it on my knees. I thank God every day for the people that were there to help me through it. And I can still remember, because a lot of us need to do closure. I said goodbye to the priesthood on July 16th, 1986. And I picked that day on purpose. It's the feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, where I was born and raised as a kid in Camden. I had to go back to my roots. And I took part in a retreat weekend run by Al-Anon, a retreat weekend of grief and loss. And on the weekend, all of us said goodbye to so many things in the course of our journey. And one of the things I had to do was write a letter to Father Vince and say goodbye to him. And then basically what we all did, I said my last Mass that day, and at the Mass everybody read their letters, including me. After the Mass we had pre-dug a grave outside. We all went outside, took our letters, put them in the grave. I took my chalice and my collar and put it in the grave. We had a funeral service. We said goodbye to everything, and we buried it. And it's ironical because on July 16th every year, I go visit my grave. It's really weird. But I go to that spot. It's Camden County College. It used to be the retreat house back then. I know exactly where I'm buried, and I lay flowers there. It's a closure. Here at Starting Point, we have the Recovery Cemetery on the side of our building. It's a plot of ground. We do a lot of burials out there. And people that are ending relationships, they're saying goodbye to someone. We have them write, say goodbye. We take the letters out. We burn them. We bury them. And we do a little funeral, a prayer service to say goodbye to them. We do all kinds of closures and things in that direction. I've had people who are trying to work through and say so long to the aspect of their addictive life, have taken things from their addiction lifestyle, taken them out there, and we burned them and buried them and say goodbye to them with prayer and stay connected in that direction. We need things we need physical things inside of us to be able to say goodbye. That's what a funeral is all about. That's what a closure is all about. That's what an ending is all about. But we got to go through those stages. You got to feel the feelings. Sadness is a powerful feeling. It's like watching a part of my life come to an end. But it's okay. Things must come to an end for something new to be born. It's part of a process we have to go through in life. You know, I joke a little bit about this because I live in a 55 and over community. And I go to the gym every morning. There's about 9 of us that go to the gym in the morning. And I love being around the guys. You know, we're all a little older, what can I tell you? But anyway, you know, they're always talking about how wonderful things were back in the 40s and the 50s. And if we can just go back and things were just the way they were then, everything would be wonderful and be great. And I just have to remind them, I think there were problems back then. I think situations occurred back then. The bottom line is you can't go back. You can't. And many of us have a tendency to want to go back. We have a tendency to want to make things the way they were a long time ago. I mean, take a simple thing in a relationship. If you're in a relationship, it's never going to stay the same. It's in a process of changing every day. It's a process every day. You know, if you have children, it's a process of change every day. And the little ones especially, I don't know why they do this, they grow up. Then they make wacky decisions, do all kinds of crazy things. And sometimes they even do things that are hurtful, things that are painful. And we can't understand why. You know, even when it comes to addiction, people die from their addiction. You know, can we explain that? Nobody can. Nobody can explain the aspects of anything in the course of the journey of life. I don't try to explain it. The hardest part is accepting it. See, acceptance is the last part of grieving, but we don't just come to acceptance. See, I can do that intellectually. It's not a problem at all. I can give a talk on grief and loss in 45, 50 minutes. I can talk about the stages. But really, in reality, to come to acceptance only comes through struggle, comes through work, comes through working through stuff, and coming to a sense of peace. And it's part of a process. You're going to find yourself going through a lot of changes. Sometimes you're going to miss the old. Sometimes you're going to want to go back. Sometimes you want to restructure things. You know, I did nostalgia while I was on vacation. You know, my grandkids were there. They're 20 and 16 now. You know, we did, you know, nostalgia. It was nice, you know. And they showed photographs of how we used to play Papa Park. You know, Papa Park meant they'd climb all over me. And today they can't climb all over me because they would kill me today if they climbed all over me. But the bottom line was I did stuff I could do years ago with little ones. I can't do that today. I can look at life differently today. You know, it's funny when you look at life, you look back. It's nice to look back. My wife and I were joking about this the other day. We looked back at our wedding photographs from 30 years ago. God, did we look different. Unbelievable. I had hair. It's fantastic. It was wonderful. You know, it's on. And yet today you realize the fact, what's the difference? You got to go on. But don't be afraid to grieve. Don't be afraid to feel. We're going to miss people. We're going to miss things that happen in our life. And every addict I've met on the face of the earth, myself included, you're going to miss your addiction. You're going to miss it. It doesn't mean you're going to use again. It just means that you have feelings. And feelings go through you on occasion. And we got this wacky disease that on occasion comes and knocks on the door and wants to come back in. And we got to be strong enough to be able to leave it where it belongs. And many of us want to be able to deal with that because sometimes I get overwhelmed with feelings. I don't know what to deal with them. I thank God and I have people in my life I can share that with. I can talk about that stuff with. Because if you don't, it'll eat you alive on the inside. And that's why you got to allow yourself to grieve, allow yourself to feel, allow yourself to go through changes, and realize the fact that life moves on. You know, we live in a very powerful and beautiful world. Last time I checked, maybe I'm wrong, you're going to let me know, okay? Last time I checked, the world is dysfunctional. It's crazy. You know why? It's supposed to be. The secret is we have to live in it. We have to learn from it. We got to grow from it. And we're not going to find answers to it. You know, we can do everything possible to try to fix somebody. You can't fix anybody. I'm sorry. You know, good luck. You can try, but you're not. Everybody's going to find their journey. They're going to find their way. I always say this over and over again. Everything in life finds its way in God's time, not in our time. It goes where it's supposed to go. You know, and I hear this all the time. I work with families all the time. They'll say to me, is my child going to get recovery? I can't answer that question. All I can do is, and even when working rehabs and everything else, we plant seeds. We give them the tools. We show them the way. And only until they're ready can they do that. Will they be ready? Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. There's no answer to any of these questions. Why is life the way it is? Because it is. There's so many things in life that we don't have answers to. That's because we're not supposed to have answers to it. We can use the word why so many times. And yet, you know, learn something. I can logically look at everything in life, and I can even do things like, if this had only happened, that would not have happened. Okay, sounds nice. And I can learn lessons from it and try maybe not to make it happen to somebody else later on. But whatever happened, happened. And even though I'm going to go through pain, I'm going to go through struggle, I've got to come to that point where I can finally realize the fact and come to acceptance of it. See, to me, acceptance is the most beautiful spiritual word on the face of this earth. But acceptance is not something you can do intellectually. Acceptance means being able to look in that mirror every day and accept the reality of yourself. No matter what defects we have, no matter what's going on, no matter what's going on in the course of our life. We can look at all the people that have crossed our path in our life, and we can let them be our teacher. You know, the other day I was at that early plaque right there, looked at my buddy Norm, who took me to my first meeting a long, 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 long time ago, 1969 to be exact, you know. And I looked at him and I said, you know, what a beautiful man, fantastic man. And we lost him early. Not from this disease, but we lost him. You know, and I miss him. I still miss him. And I still feel sad over the fact that he's not around. And I'll feel sad over all the people that are not around. Look at the therapists that have been part of my journey and part of my life over the years. You know, even the ones that we left, like Alice and Teresa, that left recently. They were part of the journey of my life. They'll be part of my journey forever and ever. They're connected right in here. There's a sadness to that. And yet at the same time, there's a joy to it. Sounds strange. There's a sadness, but a joy that they were part of your journey and part of your life. That goes for everything in life. Did you ever stop and look at life and do an inventory and realize the fact that whatever you came through, you were supposed to come through? Whatever you experienced, you were supposed to experience? Well, individuals you got connected with and involved with, you were supposed to. To be open to learn from them and grow from them. Everybody becomes a teacher in your life every day. You didn't get involved in relationships by accident. You didn't connect with people by accident. All individuals that can become part of your journey. They become your teachers and you become a pupil every day. So you're both. It's all part of the process going on. And I can look at people in the course of my journey and I can see both the joy and the sadness in them. You know, I can see that all the time. Look at this poor lady over here. She knows how much I love her. But the concept is, we know what I'm talking about. It's that concept of joy and sadness that we go through in the course of our journey. And it's okay. Whatever you feel, feel. Be in touch with it. Be in touch with a support group around you. Be in touch with people. But don't try to go out there all by yourself. Don't try to be alone. Because the grieving process needs family. It needs to be connected. It needs to be around people. And I know in the course of my own journey, you know, I'm experiencing, you know, I was thinking of my oldest grandson the other day. You know, when he was born, he was 1 pound, 13 ounces. I actually held him in my hand like a slab of butter. He was actually, I could see inside of him because the skin hadn't been developed yet. And I remember that, you know, and in July, guess what? He's getting married. You know, and now we call him Mountain Man. He's taller than me. He's up here somewhere, you know, and basically he's got the beard. He lives in Montana, you know. And I look at that and I say, my pound of butter, I'm going to attend his wedding in July. Isn't that amazing? You know about life, how powerful life is? Did you ever think of your wildest dreams when you held him? That one day you'd be seeing him walk down an aisle? And where it's going to go from there, who knows? It's the same thing as regards to life in general. We never know. You know, to try to understand it, you'll never understand it. You never will. Don't try. Life is just this powerful, powerful experience that we all have to go through. Try to do it to the best of your ability. If you're going through a lot of hurt and a lot of pain, do the best you can with it. Stay connected. And realize the fact, feel your feelings. Be in touch with them. But also realize the fact that you're not in charge. You have no control. Sorry. You can't make people be who you want them to be. You can't fix people. You can't change what is. Why do things happen? If I could answer that, you know, I take the show on the road. I can't answer that. I'm sorry. What I can do is feel and be in touch with it. So what I want to do in this series, I want to spend next week concentrating just on the first 3 stages of grieving. And I want to connect them to the 12 steps. Because I really believe what Patrick Carnes actually said. To me, the 12 steps are what I call the absolute formula for grieving. When they were put together by the early founders, they put together a powerful formula to teach us how to be able to go through transition and go through change. They're beautiful. They work. And yet, so many of us have a hard time with them because we got to do our work. So it's a process to take us through. And then the last session 2 weeks from now, we'll concentrate on sadness, and we'll concentrate primarily on acceptance, the last 2 stages of grieving, and we'll take you through that. I want to mention a couple of things to you. We have 3 grief counselors here at Starting Point. I want to kind of tell you about them real quickly. Annie Metzler, who's doing the workshop, is one of our grief counselors, and she works here on Fridays. Pat Opes is also one of our grief counselors, who's been with us for a long period of time. Pat lost a child of her own and works primarily with parents who have lost children from addiction. So she's a very powerful therapist. And we also have Kevin Elsey, who is a chaplain for hospice and also a grief counselor. Okay, the 3 of them have practices here, and if you need any help or anything in that direction, feel free to get in touch with them. They'll be glad to help you through the process you have to go through in the course of your journey. Okay? So thanks for coming out. Once again, there's a Naranon meeting tonight, and there's meditation right after this. Okay? But before we close, we have a tradition that we started here now. At the end of the 7 o'clock lecture, we do a short prayer service for all the people that are part of our family here at Starting Point. I'm going to ask you to take a moment. I'd like you to close your eyes and just relax. God, we come before you in memory tonight. We thank you for all those people who have come through our doors, for all those people who have been part of our journey, for all those who have touched us in one way or another. They are now all with you. They are resting in the peace of your hands. Teach us here on this earth to learn from them and grow from them. But above all, to have a sense of gratitude, a sense of love for allowing them to be part of our journey and part of our life. This room will always be a memory to them, a place where we can come and spend time and reflect and realize that every one of them has walked the journey of this earth, and now are walking the journey along with you. Bless them, but above all, God, bless us and help us on our journey. Help us to be able to be connected to one another and see the beauty inside of our own selves. We thank you, God, for the gift you've given us to have our experience with them, and we ask that you continue to bless us as you have blessed us with them. We ask this in your name. Amen. We have a simple way that we close. Can we join hands and we'll say the Serenity Prayer? Oops, forgot I'm wired. I can't. Can you get that off of here? Can you get that off of here? Thank you. Okay. I tried walking around the room with it one time. I almost choked myself to death. Who woke us up this morning? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Tomorrow somebody special, because God will make no junk.
Joe Ryder, I came to a few lecture series. I'm Scotty Mack's best friend. Scotty McIntyre. Sponsor, best friend. This is my wife, Ian. We had a special needs son we lost a couple of months ago. And
But I agree with you. I'm so grateful for the gift that we had. And we knew he was a gift. So, but it's tough being without him. So, thank you.
Thank you. Do me a favor, push that button on the other side and shut that off. It's right in the middle.